Before the arrival of the Spanish in the early 16th century, the region now known as Mexico was home to some of the most advanced civilizations in the Americas. Among them, the Aztecs dominated central Mexico with a powerful empire centered around their capital, Tenochtitlán, a city renowned for its impressive architecture, intricate canals, and bustling markets. The Maya civilization, flourishing in the Yucatan Peninsula and parts of Central America, was known for its remarkable achievements in mathematics, astronomy, and writing. Other groups, such as the Zapotecs, Mixtecs, and Toltecs, also contributed rich cultural and political traditions to the region's mosaic. The importance of these civilizations extended beyond their borders. Mexico was a hub for trade networks that connected different regions, allowing for the exchange of goods such as cacao, obsidian, textiles, and precious metals. The land itself was rich in natural resources, with fertile soil for agriculture and rivers supporting irrigation. Beyond material wealth, the region held immense cultural and religious significance, with elaborate temples, ceremonial centers, and artistic achievements that reflected sophisticated social hierarchies and belief systems. In essence, pre-Columbian Mexico was not an empty land waiting for European discovery, whereas a complex, thriving world, whose social, economic, and political structures would both challenge and shape the Spanish conquest that followed. In Iwo Hernán Cortés arrived on the eastern coast of Mexico with a small force of soldiers. Driven by ambition, the promise of wealth, and the desire to expand Spanish influence in the New World. Like many conquistadors of his time, Cortés was motivated by the lure of gold and other riches, the opportunity to claim new territories for the Spanish crown, and the mission to spread Christianity to indigenous peoples. His arrival marked the beginning of a dramatic encounter between two very different worlds. One that had developed complex societies over centuries, and another fueled by European exploration, military technology, and imperial ambition. Cortés quickly began exploring the region, assessing both the strengths and weaknesses of the indigenous states he encountered. While the Aztec Empire appeared formidable, its centralized power structure and the resentment of neighboring peoples toward Aztec dominance created opportunities for Cortés to form alliances. These alliances, along with his small but strategically organized force, would prove crucial in the coming years as he moved toward the heart of Mesoamerican civilization. Recognizing that his small contingent could not defeat the Aztecs alone, Cortés relied heavily on alliances with indigenous groups who opposed Aztec rule. The Tlaxcalans, long subjugated and resenting Aztec demands for tribute and warfare, became some of his most important allies. They provided thousands of warriors, knowledge of the terrain, and strategic guidance. Other groups also joined Cortés in hopes of gaining freedom from Aztec domination. These alliances were not only military partnerships, but also diplomatic arrangements that required negotiation, gifts, and careful management of local politics. The use of local knowledge and troops proved decisive. Indigenous allies guided the Spanish through unfamiliar landscapes, advised on Aztec military tactics, and helped coordinate attacks on cities and fortresses. Their support allowed Cortés to strike effectively, despite being vastly outnumbered, using a combination of surprise, mobility, and psychological impact to challenge the Aztec forces. This integration of European military technologies, such as firearms, steel swords, and horses with indigenous manpower and intelligence, exemplified the hybrid strategy that made the Spanish conquest possible. The fall of the Aztec Empire began with Cortés' initial interactions with Emperor Moctezuma II.
Among them, the Aztecs dominated central.
At first, the emperor received the Spanish with cautious hospitality, uncertain of their intentions and influenced by prophecies and diplomatic considerations. However, tensions soon escalated due to cultural misunderstandings. The Spanish demand for gold, and the presence of foreign soldiers in the heart of the Aztec capital. Cortés eventually took Moctezuma hostage in an attempt to control the empire through its ruler, a strategy that temporarily subdued resistance but created deep resentment among the Aztec people. Conflict intensified as the Aztecs revolted against the Spanish occupation. Fighting in the streets of Tenochtitlan became fierce, culminating in the famous La Noche Trieste, when the Spanish attempted to flee the city under attack and suffered heavy losses. Cortés regrouped with the support of his indigenous allies, laying siege to the city in 1521. The siege lasted several months, cutting off food and water, and weakening the Aztec defenders. European diseases, particularly smallpox, played a catastrophic role in the fall of the Aztec Empire. Indigenous populations had no immunity to these new illnesses, resulting in massive deaths that crippled the social and military structures of the empire. The combination of relentless Spanish military pressure, indigenous alliances, and devastating epidemics ultimately led to the collapse of Tenochtitlán, marking the end of Aztec political power and the beginning of Spanish domination in Mexico. The conquest of the Aztec Empire was not merely a military victory. It represented a profound transformation of Mesoamerican society. The fall of Tenochtitlán allowed the Spanish to establish colonial rule, impose new economic and religious systems, and reshape the cultural landscape. The dramatic encounter between the Aztec civilization and Spanish forces exemplifies the complex interplay of diplomacy, warfare, technology, and disease that defined the Spanish conquest of Mexico and set the stage for centuries of colonial rule. Following the conquest, Spain moved to establish formal colonial administration over its new territory. In 1535, the Spanish crown created the Viceroyalty of New Spain, a centralized political structure designed to govern the vast lands of Mexico and surrounding regions. The viceroy, appointed by the King of Spain, held supreme authority, overseeing legal, administrative, and economic matters. This system imposed Spanish laws, governance structures, and social hierarchies that placed Europeans at the top, mestizos mixed populations in the middle, and indigenous peoples and enslaved Africans at the bottom. The Catholic Church played a central role in the consolidation of colonial rule. Missionaries and priests accompanied conquistadors and later settlers, aiming to convert indigenous populations to Christianity. Churches, monasteries, and schools were established throughout New Spain, promoting religious education and reshaping cultural practices. Conversion often went hand in hand with social control, as the Church not only spread spiritual teachings but also reinforced Spanish authority and legitimized the new colonial order. Spanish administration also introduced new economic systems, taxation, and labor practices, such as the encomienda, which granted Spanish settlers the right to extract labor and tribute from indigenous communities. While these systems were often exploitative, they created a framework for organizing society, collecting revenue, and sustaining Spanish colonial expansion. Economic exploitation became a cornerstone of Spanish rule in Mexico. The encomienda system forced indigenous people to work for Spanish encomenderos, often under harsh conditions, while requiring them to provide tribute in the form of goods or labor. This system allowed the Spanish to control large populations and extract wealth efficiently, though it caused widespread suffering, displacement, and population decline among native communities. Mining, particularly of silver and gold, became the foundation of the colonial economy. Rich deposits in regions such as Zacatecas and Guanajuato were developed using indigenous labor and later African slaves. Mines operated under grueling conditions, with long hours, dangerous work, and minimal compensation. The wealth extracted from these mines fueled the Spanish Empire, funded European wars, and facilitated global trade, making New Spain one of the most economically valuable colonies in the Americas. The impact on indigenous communities was profound. Traditional economies were disrupted, social hierarchies were altered, and population decline from overwork and disease weakened societies. The imposition of forced labor and tribute systems eroded cultural practices and autonomy, embedding a legacy of exploitation that would persist for centuries. Through these economic and labor systems, Spain transformed Mexico into a colony whose primary function was to supply wealth to the empire. The combination of the encomienda, mining operations, and taxation reshaped indigenous life, creating social stratification, economic dependency, and cultural disruption, while establishing New Spain as a critical hub in the global Spanish colonial network. Spanish colonization also brought profound cultural and social transformation. Indigenous practices were either suppressed or merged with Spanish traditions, giving rise to mestizo populations who blended European and indigenous heritage. This new cultural synthesis affected language, art, architecture, and social norms, creating a uniquely Mexican identity that reflected both pre-Columbian and European influences. Religion became a central tool in reshaping society. Catholicism was imposed as the dominant faith, yet many indigenous beliefs and rituals were adapted into Christian practices, resulting in syncretic traditions that persist to this day. Spanish language replaced many native languages as the medium of administration, education, and trade, while local customs were modified or restricted according to colonial norms. Social hierarchy and governance were also transformed. Europeans occupied the highest social ranks, mestizos held intermediary positions, and indigenous peoples often became laborers or subjects under colonial authority. Economically, traditional forms of subsistence and trade were replaced by Spanish-imposed systems centered on mining, agriculture, and tribute. These transformations were not merely superficial. They reshaped the identity, society, and culture of Mexico for centuries, embedding European institutions, religion, and social structures, while leaving traces of indigenous heritage in language, customs, and daily life. The fusion of cultures created a complex, stratified society that defined New Spain and laid the foundation for modern Mexican identity.